you must watch this video before you build your first GPT-5 agent. So I've applied OpenAI's entire GPT-5 prompting guide over to my agents, and I gotta say, this is the first time I've had to actually think about prompting because of a new model that has released. But trust me, the results are worth it. And so today I'll show you 3 key principles from this guide that you need to apply to your agents so that GPT-5 is consistently hitting the mark for what you expect in your prompts. I'll first explain how this changes from actually prompting within the ChatGPT app itself, and then we can dive straight into these principles where I'll cover some demos and then do some explaining afterwards. So with that being said, we can open a new tab and go straight into chatgpt.com. And if you land on this page here, and you'll see it's been a couple of weeks now. So now we have the range of different kind of versions of ChatGPT that you can have. So auto is deciding how long you want it to think. So that does it on autopilot. And then you have fast, which is always having consistently fast answers. And then thinking, which obviously thinks longer, and then pro, which is for research grade thinking and intelligence, okay? And then on top of that, you now have ChatGPT 4.0, which has been brought back by the OpenAI team. And so what you see here is a range of different models within ChatGPT 5, which alters kind of the output that you would get depending on what your query is to ChatGPT in the first place. So most of the time, you're just better off using this auto here. But the way this works, once you actually click auto, ChatGPT has structured a router, which is a new concept that automatically chooses the best model within the range of models that you see on the outside and actually picks a version of ChatGPT inside this router to actually accomplish this task. So jumping back into the Figma, what this looks like is this diagram over here. The quality looks really bad, but this is kind of the external options that you get, which are all the GPTs. But then this router, which is a new feature that has been implemented, automatically picks each of these models. So out of GPT-5 main, we have main mini, GPT-5 thinking mini, and then just all of these ranges that determine how long ChatGPT is going to be thinking for to accomplish what you've set it out to do. And so I have a couple of points to go through that alone. Firstly is that the routing concept is actually really difficult to apply, and it hasn't been that successful from OpenAI, which is why they allowed a lot more user control with the fast and then thinking models that you can manually apply. But secondly is that this is only available within the ChatGPT app itself. It's not yet available, and it's not as autopilot when you access its GPT through the API. So this means that OpenAI had to release some new parameters of how you would like to control your GPT when you access it through the API, as well as the prompting of that model has had to change a little bit. And there's some things that you need to alter yourself within the prompt to actually get the desired output, whereas in the ChatGPT app, you can just rely on this router concept. And these are all things that you can find in the GPT prompting guide that OpenAI released a couple of days ago, or it's more like a week ago, but it actually aligns everything that you need to kind of hit all these checkboxes that you need to make sure that you go through when you're prompting your AI agents. The overview kind of concept that I gathered from this is that the way that it thinks is a lot different to how other models think. A lot of times you had to explicitly list out every little bit of action within the COT, so the chain of thought, so that the task will be accomplished properly. But GPT-5 inherently thinks a lot more before it does because it makes sure that it has the correct answer. And so rather than saying, when this happens, you do this, you kind of have to explain how much thinking it needs to do for each given task. And your prompt has to have new elements factored into it to make sure that GPT-5 not only accomplishes and makes the right choices within the tools that it has at its disposal, but also hits the mark at different timelines. So depending on how much the agent actually has to think, these are all things they need to specify to think more and more carefully depending on the higher level that a task is. And you need to say that within your prompt, otherwise you might get it completely wrong for a simple workflow. Now with that out of the way, we can jump into in here where I'll show you an example of these principles within a complex AI agent system. This is something that I actually struggled to test out and make sure that it was actually better for the specific use case, because it is a higher level agent carrying out different sorts of tasks, and I'll walk through each of these different versions in a second. And what I've got here is 3 of the exact same copies of the same system, just built upon different models, and then also the different prompting of the GPT-5 models when I actually applied it. And so what the system does, it takes in the transcripts from all of my calls via Otter AI, and then makes internal kind of executions in the CRM or making a proposal based on the results of those calls to make sure that I don't have to go through this kind of admin and repetitive work myself, okay? So once all of that is done, it notifies me on Slack. Now, what I've got here is obviously a masked version of this, but it's pretty much like dummy data for a very realistic length of transcript that the agent would need to work with whenever it needs to do one of these updates. So in the 4.1, you can see that there's a lot of like text over here. So this is an entire meeting that I masked with dummy results. And then I put into the summary here just for you to see what the call was about, so you know kind of the context of the actions that the agent needs to take. And so you can see that this particular call was between Mikael Rivera and Marcus Chen, where we discussed the findings from a 7-day audit of Chen's consulting business. We saved 40 hours per month with the systems offered. And then over here, it says Kaiki committed to providing a detailed project update report containing all of the discussed systems and the next steps for the team to review. Okay, now if we look at the actual tools of the agent and what it can do from this information, it can make the project updates using this tool over here. It can make a proposal triggering a separate make.com scenario, and then it can also go into my CRM and then make these triggers accordingly. But if you look at the context, it was for an existing client who we audited. Again, this is dummy data, but then obviously you wouldn't need a proposal because it's an existing client. And if it is an existing client, then it wouldn't need to go into my CRM to add this client, okay? Now, this means that the only kind of direct thing that it needs to do is create the project update and then notify me on Slack. So with that being said, let's make the first test over here, and then we'll go through the other two of how the agent would execute this. Cool, so now it's thinking for a second, and you see the difference is very clear between the 4.1s and the 5s. But within probably 10 seconds, it's triggered the project update and then notified me on Slack. And then if we look here, we got this workspace where the project update is shown from that test that we just ran. And ultimately, that was an execution of about 15 seconds, as you can see over here in the top result. So if you go back into the editor, all of these agents and systems have the exact same transcript. So if I click the GPT-5 one, and the prompt is the exact same between the GPT-5 and the 4.1, which is this that I'll go over in a second as well. If I click this, you will notice that the thinking time is significantly longer, and then it's a risk that the agent might not even actually execute the right tools. So if you go over here, we've got GPT-5, and I needed to show you this as well. We've got the GPT 4.1 on this one. And the thinking time is significantly longer. I'll update you once it actually starts taking the right actions. So the GPT 4.1 was obviously correct, and then we'll see how it goes over here as well. Okay, so it's just now made the first action and hits the wrong one, so it's triggering a proposal for some reason. And that's probably gonna go back and make another decision and just notify me on Slack. Okay, so this is a regular problem that I had multiple times testing this, and that is that probably so many people are testing it in the first place. The agent doesn't actually operate in the cleanest form possible. You get this error here, received tool input didn't match expected schema. So it's either that one or that the response was actually too long so the AI, because it's getting overused right now through the API, it just takes too long to make the decision, and then we time out on the API request. But you can see that it didn't even reach the end, first of all, with the original prompt that I put into 4.1. And secondly, it chose the wrong option, so the wrong tool to actually execute, which leaves us with this other one here, which is the reprompted version. So this is here, the GPT-5 version. And then the same transcript here, as you can see. So Marcus Chen, so the summary is the exact same. If we click run on this one, again, it'll take a bit longer as well, but we'll see right now if it makes the right executions. Okay, so it's executed the project update tool and then notified us on Slack, which means it's still thinking, just going to do the output here. It's finished over here, and we can check the Slack, and we have also been notified of that as well. So you may be looking at the GPT-5 old prompt, which is the same as the 4.1 prompt, and the GPT-5 new prompt. And originally you were thinking that GPT-5 was just a trash model, that it wasn't capable of actually taking on these complex tasks that OpenAI was promising us and be able to level up the agents for our tasks to execute things consistently. But if you look closely, it really does come down to the prompt that probably going to have to change a lot now because of this new model. And I really want to emphasize that it's probably the first time that we need to think about prompting in a different way because of a different model to be able to optimize its capabilities. But like I said at the start of the video, it is something new to look at and something worth knowing to reprompt your agents if you want to implement GPT-5. So it's not as simple as it was before. So say before 4.1 came out, we had 4.0, and then it was just a simple click over here to switch the model, and then boom, like it was done. The agent has instantly become smarter. No, in this way, we actually have to work a little bit and change our style of instructing the agent so that we do get the upsides of it without the downsides, as you saw over here in the old GPT-5 prompt. So first, I want to do a side-by-side comparison between the old prompt and then the new prompt. So if we go into the agent and click over here, we can see everything seems fine, right? We got the role, the task, all the specifics, like the exact way that you would prompt agents up until GPT-5 came out, and we needed to change this, okay? So essentially it says that you are a master meeting assistant who has a knack for identifying the details of the meeting transcripts. You're extremely precise and accurate in your evaluations. And then a task is to say your job is to review meeting transcripts containing specific data and then trigger the tools, right? The specifics over here says that you should think about these step by step for the transcripts that come in. So first read the transcript that's provided and then execute the tools at your disposal accordingly. So pretty simple, pretty straightforward. The context here I just put into so it knows who is on the call and probably what the call is going to be more about. And then the tools here was to obviously emphasize the actions that it has at its disposal and the responsibility that each one of these carry. And then I have the examples here, which is really to outline kind of the summarized way that it should act depending on the different sort of transcripts that come in. So for example, if the transcript was about an existing client and we are showing him the updates of the project, then the actions here to execute the project updates and then send it to Slack. So then I walked this a couple of times, you know, depending on the different sorts of meeting transcripts. And this is something that became really habitual to me, putting in the exact actions that the model needed to take depending on the type of, you know, situation that it was. So it's very action based. Like if it was this, then do this. But you'll see in a second that this changes a lot based on one of the principles that I'll show you. In here in the notes, I obviously have a whole bunch of stuff to either avoid or emphasize past points. I want to show you kind of an overview of the current prompt that I'm using, and you can see that in the role and the task there isn't much change. In fact, the task is the exact same. You see that some of the changes will occur between the specifics, and then from that point on there's quite a few changes. And so that's kind of an overview of the prompt. It's kind of around the same size. And so from here is where we actually apply major changes, starting with what OpenAI are calling the eagerness, so kind of how much the model needs to think. So over here, we can prompt the model for less eagerness. So it's saying here, GPT is by default thorough and comprehensive when trying to gather. So inherently, it means that it will always be trying to think more to make sure that it completes the task, as opposed to other lazier models like 4.1. So that is the first major change and difference that you need to be aware of, and will reflect on how you prompt the agent from that point, okay? So it's saying that we can prompt the agent for less eagerness, and to do that, there's a reasoning effort parameter, which OpenAI have added, and this is seen here in the new updated documentation. So reasoning effort over here can be minimal, low, medium, and high. And have not added this feature yet, which means when it does come out, it'll be even easier to control these agents. But then as well, we can define clear criteria in the prompt for how you want the model to explore the problem space and reduce the model's need to explore and reason too much about too many ideas. And we implement that directly in the new prompt over here. So starting with the specifics, instead of saying think about this step by step, I say to make your performance as efficient as possible, you must do the following. And then the very first thing that I show you, if you remember before, I just said read and then execute the tools accordingly. But now I'm giving it a step-by-step of first the approach, saying you must begin this task with the intention to apply a low reasoning effort. So although this is not a real parameter in NNN, as soon as I said this, the reasoning effort actually decreased for this agent, okay? The second one here is the analysis. So getting the context of the meeting transcript fast, and then discovery, and stop as soon as it understands the context of the meeting and then the tools that it needs to act upon. And then as a note here, I said avoid over searching for context you don't need. For tool decisions, step number 3, I said only use the tools that are required based on the transcript outcome, which kind of makes sense from what I said in the earlier prompt. And then over here in step 4, I said tool execution output, return a structured response listing executed tools in JSON along with a short 1-sentence justification. And this comes in with another principle that I applied. So over here in the section on minimal reasoning, I implement this first step here, which says prompting the model to give a brief explanation summarizing its thought process at the start of the final answer. For example, via bullet point list improves performance on tasks requiring higher intelligence. So actually saying do this and then tell me why you did it actually improves the idea behind the execution in the first place. So that's why I said it, and I repeat it over and over within the prompt itself. You'll see as we go further down, but this is only one of the early examples of it here. And then following on from that, still within the overall task over here in the HTML tags, we have the budgeting and then also the early stop criteria, which are two kind of methods from the earlier concept from before. So the eagerness, we got the early stop criteria, which is when the agent can name something in the context that it needs to change. And then when the top hits, so the pool of potential options that the answer may be actually converges around 70%, it means to go with that decision as opposed to loading it to a complete 100 with that extended time and then just taking longer to complete the task in itself. So this is everything that it literally copy and pasted into the prompt that made all the difference. And then over here it talks about actually putting in budget. So you got this thing where the AI is constantly thinking about how long it is doing the task for before it actually completes it, which makes it faster. And then, I mean, they've got so many good examples here in terms of how they need to gather context that it didn't even need to apply to the prompt, but probably would make the agent go even faster from this point. And so you can just look at these. I'll leave the link again in the description for you guys to go through and paste these into your current agentic workflows. So what we've just covered so far is a lot of things to do with how long it needs to think, and then also the tool calling execution. And then one more thing that I wanted to add on with this tool as well, within the minimal reasoning, that goes hand in hand with the eagerness side of things, is this point over here. So disambiguating tool instructions to the maximum extent possible and inserting agentic persistence reminders as shared above. So these examples over here, okay? So these are particularly critical at minimal reasoning to maximize agentic ability in long-running rollout and prevent premature termination. So essentially clearly defining what the tool is going to do and then what the output of that tool will be will minimize the level of reasoning that the agent needs to know about the tool before it actually executes it. So if it reads the responsibilities of the tool and the outputs as very, disambiguous and very simple, then it will take less time for it to actually execute that tool, which is a huge upside to this. In my prompt here, you see that the only time that I actually address the tools and what they do are in the tools section. So this makes it very easy for the agent to know what each of the things will do when it executes it. I added in this output format section over here where I clearly define the justification factor that I want the agent to supply me with whenever it finishes a run. And this goes back to that point. So number 4 over here, talking about this execution, criteria that it needed to fulfill. And as soon as I implemented this output format in exchange for the longer examples that I had going on, then the agent started performing better. And then at the end here, I just have a few notes that emphasize my earlier points. So saying, show me your justification for each tool. Remember that all capabilities of the tools you have at your disposal relate back to the task at hand. And I gave it the old reputation one, so saying it is crucial to my reputation that you strictly follow the steps in the specifics tab. So this is where I reference the step by step again without fail. Because my prompt instructions were more direct, we actually adhere to the third and final principle of the entire guide, which is found over here. So the intelligence optimization and instruction following, which says, like 4.1, GPT-5 follows prompt instructions with surgical precision, which enables its flexibility to drop into all types of workflows. However, its careful instruction following behavior means that poorly constructed prompts containing contradictory or vague instructions can be more damaging to GPT-5 than to other models. And it's saying that it is like GPT 4.1 to that extent, but obviously to a higher level because it is a bigger model with all of these like new capabilities in terms of tool calling and all of that sort of stuff as well. So this means that the less you put into it in terms of the examples that I just showed you and the kind of step-by-step formula that it needs to go through, then the easier you are making the GPT's job by decreasing the likelihood that you just say something that contradicts itself and then the GPT starts to really think about what the true answer may be. And so instead, if you don't want to find yourself providing so much context that the agent might lose itself and you don't know whether or not that's the case, then you need to provide what is called like an instruction hierarchy, which will essentially provide the GPT with the very bullet point, one sentence thought process that it needs to go through. So this is why I didn't go through the examples in too much detail because it might have contradicted with an earlier statement. So back over here, if I went too much into detail within my examples, I probably would have said something that would have contradicted itself and then increased the likelihood that the GPT would have like drift off into a separate topic within this chunk of text and not completed the task in the required time that I needed it to. Now, these are obviously only some of my takeaways, and there's the entire document for you to go through, so I really urge you to read this entire thing yourself because I can't cover it all in one video. I thought the agentic use case would have been great to show you these 3 principles that I learned, but there's stuff about coding here, there's stuff about app generation, front-end development, really exciting stuff that you can learn from and leverage it into your projects using GPT-5. And then I'm sure that if you do these things, you'll be able to extract more consistent and successful runs with your GPT-5 agents as opposed to the GPT 4.1s. But yeah, with that being said, thanks for watching and I hope this helped.